So, to start with, the ABCs of teaching, the ability to balance it, the ability in balance with challenge. It's important for us to balance our youth's ability with the amount of challenge that you give them. The groundwork for this strategy is the zone of proximal development. So let's look at this. So this uses, and I can't pronounce it's Lev Something-ski. It's the person who created this. I have no idea how to pronounce it. It's like Vygotsky. But this person, he used a visual representation to show the zone of proximal zone of learning. So this graph shows that relationship between challenge and ability. And if balanced, the youth stays within that zone of learning. However, if that balance is not correct, then the youth struggles. If a child has a lot of ability but not enough challenge, they're going to consider your club boring. I mean, how many of you guys have seen that? I've seen it, especially, we see it in school when our own children are not challenged in school, they become bored and they don't like it. Coincidentally, if a child is challenged too much, and they don't have the ability to meet that challenge, they're going to find it boring as well because they're going to be struggling. So if you keep it balanced, just the right amount of challenge to meet their abilities, you have engagement in the program. This model works like this. We start with a child who is capable of handling only a small challenge with their low ability level. They are in the lower left quadrant of the model. To move this youngster through the zone of learning to the higher level of knowledge and capabilities, you must challenge them just a bit, just enough to make them slightly uncomfortable. And then you let them practice until they improve their skill and are back in their comfort zone. That's that zone of learning. Then you let them experience a higher challenge and then let their ability catch back up. So you repeat that sequence over and over and over until you have ratcheted them up to have the ability to handle all challenging situations. So you can see that result looks like a staircase with small successes that put that child in that thriving trajectory. So make them moving towards long-term outcomes and give them that ability to handle increasingly challenging situations. So TSI. Anybody know what that stands for? I don't want to hear the bad guess. No. So that stands for tell me, show me, involve me. So this concept really goes back to the root of the 4-H program and the premise of this, the youth learn best when activities are engaged or when they're actively engaged in the learning process. The 4-H slogan again, learn by doing. The doing part is important. TSI, learn by doing, and experiential learning are all different ways of saying the same thing. So think about it. TSI, so tell me, show me, involve me, is, and then learn by doing and experiential learning are all the same thing. So everybody remembers being taught. Rote learning by an instructor that seemed to just like to hear himself talk. That's why I have such a hard time with this method, because I don't really like, I'm an interaction person. I like to interact with people, and so this is tough. That's why I keep stopping and asking questions, but I don't like to hear myself talk. But this is a poor practice, and it's generally very ineffective with youth. So you just, if you just tell me how to do it, I'm probably going to forget how to do it. Being shown how to do something is a little better. At least, there's something for the visual learners to see, and kids can usually better understand those concepts of being taught. However, youth are usually very anxious to try things themselves. If you're showing them but not letting them try, you're going to lose them quickly. So show me and I might learn better. So the last one, involve me. Involvement or engagement is really where the good learning takes place. Try to develop lessons, and in your curriculum, your lessons do have hands-on learning activities. That is, our 4-H curriculum. That's what one of the main components of our 4-H curriculum is. It needs to include a hands-on learning activity. But as you're trying to create some supplemental activities for your club, then you need to think about, making sure that those include active participant for the 4-H youth whenever possible. You can follow that up with the reflections of what they learned and the chances of doing it again to improve their skills. The do, reflect, apply completes the experiential learning process. So involve me is how it works. Then I'm going to involve me in how it works. Then I'll understand, and I'm probably never going to forget. Through this graphic, we express the need of leaders to focus on the kids. The kids are your audience, and should be your priority. It's easy for adult leaders to forget that kids have much less life experience, and you can talk easily beyond their comprehension. So each year, Beloit College in Wisconsin compiles a list for their faculty to gain a sense of understanding of the mindset for the incoming freshman class. So examples of this year's college, or of some of those things that to make sure that you're teaching properly. So I want you to think about this. They have no idea that Americans have ever been held hostage in Iran. They think that bottle caps have always been screw off. They have no idea what sounding like a broken record means. They don't know that voicemail replaced the answering machine, and before that, there was nothing. Most of them have no idea of life before this. They don't even know what a flip phone is. I mean, to give them a flip cell phone, they're like, I don't even know how to use this. And then to really mess with their minds, put a rotary phone in front of them that's hooked up to a landline. They don't understand it at all. My poor son's like, how do you do this? So, but think about that. Jimmy Fallon has always been the host of the Tonight Show for this age group. They have no idea who Johnny Carson is, let alone Jay Leno. They think that popcorn can only be made in the microwave. They don't know, okay, so this one, they don't know who Mork is, and they don't know where he came from. They've never heard, where's the beef? I'll walk a mile for a camel, or the plane, boss, the plane. They can't imagine not having a remote control for the television. Their lifetime has always included AIDS, and there's always been MTV in their lives. The one from this year that probably got me the most, I was reading over the list for the incoming freshmen from this year. This is the last class of millennials. After this year, so next year's class of college freshmen are going to be what they call Generation Z. Think about that. So many times, and I know at least in my own career, in fact, I was just looking and I had a thing about working with millennials and, how do we work with millennials? And I'm thinking that ship has sailed now. We need to start doing workshops on working with Gen Z youth now. And so that was crazy to me because, it still feels like the millennials should be little kids. So the other thing is thinking about the mindset of a 9-year-old. Okay, so have you ever thought about the mindset of a 9-year-old? Here's some things that young people have said. So this is what they feel that they've learned in life. I've learned that if you spread peas out on your plate, it looks like you ate more. That came from a 6-year-old. I've learned that you should never jump out of a second-story window using a sheet for a parachute. That's a 10-year-old. I've learned that you shouldn't confuse a black crayon with a Tootsie Roll. 10-year-old. I'm not sure what 10-year-old would do that, but hey, it could happen. I've learned that when you have 3 of your wild friends in the car, the driver freaks. 9-year-old. I've learned that you can't hide a piece of broccoli in a glass of milk. 7-year-old. I've learned that when you wave at people in the country, they stop what they're doing and wave back. That's a 9-year-old. I've learned that when you laugh and drink soda pop at the same time, it comes out your nose. From a 7-year-old. I've learned that goldfish don't like Jell-O. That's a 5-year-old. And I've learned that girls sweat just as much as boys. That was from an 11-year-old. So, so focus on the kids. Think like a kid. The best thing ever is to have, to take a ride with a bunch of whatever age group, with a bunch of kids in the car and just listen to their conversations. It's hilarious. It's important, that we teach to our audience and not above them, and realize that our program is all about the youth. The next one is TM. So what do you think the letters TM stand for regarding the topic of teaching kids?
Carrie, just an FYI, my battery's low and my plug-in's at my house.
Oh, okay. Okay, so if I get disconnected, what I'm going to do is I will record this session. I will record the risk management session and send it to everybody. So even though that's the one. So Rich and Tamara and Ron, you'll be needing to talk a lot about safety, but I will get that.
But I will make sure and tell them.
Okay. So what TM stands for is Teachable Moment. Sometimes we think it's trademark or time management or even transcendental meditation. That's a good word, isn't it? So the trademark of an effective educator is the ability to devise and utilize teachable moments. So to set up a teachable moment, it's actually kind of like setting up a trap and then springing that trap on at the opportune moment. When the trap is ready to be sprung, the student knows that they've been had, or in the case of education, they know what the point is that's being made. So educators we must make an effort to both set the trap and spring it right at the right moment, so that teachable moment doesn't happen, often. We must be intentional sometimes about planning and setting those educational traps. Sometimes the more you teach, the more you're going to find consistent places to set those traps for maximized results. So an example of creating a teachable moment is the manner in which the information in the presentation is being presented. So I'll bet many of you noticed that the picture included a capital D and a pair of shorts. That is an educational trap. In fact, the images are like small traps. They're going to keep you interested in learning what it means. Because I took the time to set the trap, and that was, if you look at, I don't know which one it is. Never mind. Because I took time to set the traps, I know that you are paying attention, and that and that we'll get to that slide in just a couple of moments. No mistakes. So this double negative is a reminder that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay for us as adults to make mistakes and to allow kids to make mistakes as long as they're in a safe and controlled environment. If teaching someone to operate a chainsaw, it's best not to let them screw up too bad, right? We don't want to just hand a kid a chainsaw and not give them any safety tips. And that's true, those lifelong lessons that stick out with youth are those in which the young people have learned from their mistakes. Many times adults want to rescue kids from adversity. And when that's done, then the young people are robbed of that power of that learning experience. It's okay for them to make mistakes. And, like I said before, 4-H is a good place for us to fail, a safe place to fail. So leave them on a high point. Many times educators tend to pull out their best educational tricks at the start of the class. If your best trick is used in the first 10 minutes of the activity and the last 50 minutes are boring, what do you think the kids are going to remember on their way home? They're going to remember boring. So of course, we want to make sure that we have fun activities all the way through. You want to conclude with the activity that's your best trick. So that's what will be remembered, and that's what they'll talk about the whole way home. Leave them on a high point with your best trick and have them come back for more at the next event. And, a lot of times maybe then they'll bring a friend with them. It's also important to recognize when a kid is in a good place, when the kids are in a good place to quit for the day. If you have a young person that's struggling to hit the target, don't let them fail and send them home defeated. Set the stage for success. Maybe that means moving the target closer or making the target bigger. Do that. The minute they hit that target, congratulate them and call it quits. Make sure that they have that success to take home and remember. So what does debrief have to do with teaching kids? Educators so many times do a tremendous job of educating, but then fail to stop and discuss what just happened, and then drive home their educational message in a good debriefing session. So it's a second step in the experiential learning process. Remember, do, reflect, apply. So many times the plan is set and sprung, and the educational trap, that we set and spring the educational trap successfully, and then we let the kids wander off without going through that explanation of what just happened or why it's important. A good debriefing session cements the educational event in the minds of the students so that they will never forget. The next one is fun. Quality educational experiences for youth must incorporate fun. Educational experiences that don't incorporate fun are not as effective as they could have been. And if your educational event isn't fun, you're going to find yourself teaching no one at your next scheduled event. Kids just want to have fun. SPE. Okay, so now we've reached a part of the program where we generously offer one crisp, clean $100 bill to anybody who can guess, who has not previously seen this presentation or may have been privy to this slide, to the meaning of the acronym SPE. Anybody have any guesses? Nope. So what do you think the E stands for? Maybe education. So, okay, so this is a little academic, but just follow me. So Dr. Ron Howard, who's one of the godfathers of the National 4-H Shooting Sports Program, says it like this: very few young people are interested in a program overtly focused on coping competencies and contribution skills. The concept of life skill development is neither attractive nor exciting. As a result, these elements are embedded in hands-on experiential learning in subject matter that is fun. Leaders and coaches must understand their roles in teaching life skills, but they also must carefully coat the medicine of life skills education with the easily swallowed activity of shooting and related interests. Okay, so this is your last chance. Any more guesses? Okay, so we're gonna do it this way. The S stands for sneaky. We aren't teaching life skills overtly. We have to carefully coat the medicine of life skills with the easily swallowed activity of shooting sports. We can do it covertly so that the kids don't really know that they're learning how to transition into adulthood more easily. The P stands for prophylactic. Before you snicker too hard, let's consider that word. The root of the English word prophylactic comes from the Greek word prophylaktikos, which means preventative or protective. Anyone here in the medical field? They will confirm this to be true. Therefore, SPE stands for Sneaky Prophylactic Education, which really means preventative or protective education delivered in a covert manner. Let's put it another way. If we take a 9-year-old youngster and let them run the streets with no proper adult supervision until they're 18 years old, what are the odds of that young person growing up to be a contributing member of society? Not good. If we take that same young person and put them in a positive peer groups with a caring adult for guidance, and we teach them the life skills that they will need to thrive into adulthood, what are the odds that they will become a contributing member of society? Much better. That's where the preventative part is that we do in 4-H. If we have fun with that young person for those 9 years, they don't even realize what's happening. That's the sneaky part. Okay, so how'd you do on your guesses? Good job. Okay, because the 4-H thriving model is new, many of you are probably wondering about the whereabouts of essential elements. Some of you may have learned about essential elements or targeting life skills. You know, you need to understand that yes, they are still there. They are still very important. So many of our experienced leaders may recognize the opportunities for belonging, which is really that emphasis on program quality, as one of the essential elements of the positive youth development. It's critically important to, that we create a space for belonging, for mastery, for independence and generosity in a 4-H program. Likewise, youth are in a well-run program that consistently honors the skills that are found in the Targeting Life Skills model are gaining 21st century learning skills. So they really are there. Okay, does anybody have any questions related to, or if you have any questions related to the youth development model or youth development module, please let me know. And now I'm going to move on to the last module, which is not up. Let me pull it up really quick. And this one is the risk management. More affectionately known as covering your assets. This is the final module in this series. So the main topics of this module are the risk assessment of mixing kids and guns, the review of the National 4-H Shooting Sports Minimum Standards, the review of state level best practices, looking a look at how to put together a good risk management plan and understanding the 4-H shooting sports risk management model. As incidences such as school or public shootings hit the news, and as federal and state legislation pose possible unintended negative consequences for the 4-H shooting sports program, perhaps it's useful to explain why it is a good idea to mix kids and guns. Let's examine the purpose of the 4-H shooting sports program. First and foremost, safety of the youth and adults in the program is a major focus. As you will see later in this presentation, the 4-H shooting sports has a stellar safety record that cannot be approached by any other youth sports activity. The program instills firearm safety and concepts such as muzzle control to youth until it becomes second nature. 4-H shooting sports does not condone or promote combat sports such as paintball because this activity runs counter with the safety concepts that are thoroughly taught in 4-H. You never hear the word weapon uttered in a 4-H shooting sports event or activity of any kind. Positive youth development is the goal of the program, and the firearm or archery equipment is only a vehicle to help us accomplish that mission. So just as the 4-H horse or livestock project, the animal is also the vehicle to achieve the positive youth development goal. Our focus on positive youth development explains why we are more concerned with creating champion kids, not necessarily champion shooters. Another major focus of the 4-H shooting sports is life skill development. So, is it safe to put firearms in the hands of youth? Well, speaking of safety, let's look at the record. The 4-H shooting sports program reached 450,000 youth in 2016. About half of that number were reached as part of a long-term, more extensive experience in a 4-H club environment. The other half were reached through short-term experiences such as camp and fairs. This program has been in operation since 1980. In that time period, it is estimated that more than 3 million member years of 4-H member contact has been achieved. So 3 million member years. It also in the same time period from 1980 to 2012, there have only been 6 documented injuries sustained in the 4-H shooting sports program. None of them were fatal or had catastrophic injuries. Now let's compare the safety record of 4-H shooting sports with other youth sports. Life insurance companies that provide 4-H with supplemental insurance policies for our regular 4-H programs insure our 4-H shooting sports at the same rate as all other activities. However, premiums for the 4-H horse or ATV projects are double those rates of shooting sports. And what do we do? What do those numbers look like when we compare injury rates with other youth sports? So we're going to look at this other youth sports data. Youth sports participation data that you will see comes from engagesports.com. It's for it's for youth ages 6 to 17. The youth sports data comes from Youth Sports Worldwide and is for total injuries of 19 and under. And more than 2.6 million children under ages 19 and under are seen in emergency departments for injuries related to sports and recreation each year, that as reported by the Center for Disease Control. So you'll see that the sport in the first column, the annual participation numbers in the second column, and the number of injuries in the third column, and then the injury rate expressed by a percentage in the fourth column. The injury rates are obtained by dividing the number of injuries by the total number of participations. As you can see, sports like football and wrestling have the highest injury rate of all youth sports. And on this list, gymnastics and 4-H shooting sports have the lowest injury rates of the sports listed on the table, with the 4-H shooting sports by far the lowest rate. In fact, a young person is 4 times more likely to be injured playing football versus playing hockey, and 56,000 times more likely to be hurt playing soccer than being involved in 4-H shooting sports. And at the same time, a young person is 220,000 times more likely to be hurt playing football versus being involved in shooting sports. Or you could be like me, and I have a son that plays football and is in 4-H shooting sports. So 4-H shooting sports is one of the safest activities that a young person can be involved in. So people still worry about why we're going to create another school shooting situation like Columbine or what just happened in Florida if we put guns in the hands of kids. And that is not the case. Not likely. In addition to the life skills that a young person, or the life skill of personal safety and responsibility that is taught in 4-H, such a thing is unlikely to happen for the following reasons. First and foremost, safety is the main driver of the 4-H program, 4-H shooting sports program. Next, we place a significant adult in the lives of 4-H members. That significant adult could be a parent or an adult volunteer leader. The adults involved in the 4-H program are definitely positive influences in the lives of the young people that they serve. Another major reason for this hypothetical example that would never happen is that 4-H is a family-oriented activity. 4-H parents know what their kids are up to, and they know what other kids are up to. That's a novel concept. We also place young people involved in the 4-H shooting sports into positive peer groups that help and support each other. The 4-H program is focused on creating a safe and inclusive environment for young people that can counteract the bullying behaviors that are the root of many of these school shootings that have occurred. And last but not least, 4-H teaches young people to respect other people. These key developmental characteristics are missing from the backgrounds and lives of the youth and adults who perpetrate these acts of human violence. So what are 5 things that 4-H shooting sports does well? And these are, as we talk to people about why it's good to mix kids and guns, we need to remind them that, really what drives the 4-H program. So as in a David Letterman reverse order, which most of the kids today, the college freshmen, would not know who David Letterman was. Number 5, teaching first shot. We are teaching kids and adults the first shot fundamentals. Number 4, we are teaching adults to teach kids, and we do it very effectively. Life skill development. Life skill development is the focus of young people, is our focus. Positive youth development. This is the main staple of our program. And number 1 on the list of things that 4-H shooting sports does well, we practice and promote safety of firearms and for each other. So these are the things that separate the 4-H shooting sports program from other youth shooting programs. The goal is not to claim Olympic medals. Our goal is to create gold medal kids. So the minimum standards of the 4-H shooting sports program. There are 10 of these minimum standards that are in the operation of a 4-H program. These standards have been developed by the National Committee, and they are non-negotiable. 4-H National Headquarters supports these minimum standards in a way that helps make it ensure the safety of the program. So the first one, the National 4-H Shooting Sports Curriculum is the established adult teaching curriculum for training adults to teach youth the shooting sports within the 4-H program. You can only use the 4-H shooting sports curriculum as a base. All instructors accept and abide by the National 4-H Shooting Sports Code of Conduct. And for those of you who have never seen the 4-H Shooting Sports Code of Conduct, here it is. I will respect all people and property. I will set a good example as a mentor and role model, conduct myself and the program in a professional and ethical manner. Learn and implement positive youth development principles that guide the program. Continue to expand my competencies in the subject matter I teach. Will adhere to the National Shooting Sports Curriculum, national minimum standards of safety, and state-level best practices and policies. These are the things that we ask you to keep into your thinking anytime you are wearing your 4-H shooting sports instructor hat. Back to the minimum standards. So number 3, state, county, and club level 4-H shooting sports program should have a written risk management plan, which includes items such as emergency response and preparedness, insurance, safe storage of firearms and ammunition. There is a shooting or risk management plan or worksheet on the Nevada 4-H website. If you go to the shooting sports page, you will find a worksheet to work through on the risk management plan, and that is what we ask that you fill out. All certified 4-H shooting sports instructors must be a minimum of age 21 and have completed a state-level 4-H shooting sports workshop with a specific discipline that they will be teaching. Now, I will say that in order to be in charge of a live fire range, they must be age 21 or older. You can have teen leaders that are helpers, but they cannot ever be left in charge. Number 5, state-level 4-H shooting sports instructor certification workshops must provide a minimum of 12 hours of instruction. This includes a minimum of 9 hours of instruction in each specific discipline and a minimum of 3 hours of instruction in teaching positive youth development, life skills, and risk management. It is preferable and recommended that the state-level certification workshops provide 15 hours of instruction composed of 12 hours of discipline instruction and 3 hours of instruction in teaching positive youth development, life skills, and risk management. To maintain certification as a 4-H shooting sports level 1 or level 2 instructor, one must teach or assist in instruction within the discipline certified at least once every 3 years. Only factory ammunition is used in 4-H shooting sports competitive events. Regarding simulated combat sports, including but not limited to paintball guns, airsoft, laser tag, or archery tag, pointing any type of gun, including paintball guns, airsoft guns, laser paintball, archery tag bows, and arrows or sighting devices at any person or any humanoid-shaped targets is inappropriate for a 4-H activity. That humanoid-shaped target includes the fun human zombie targets. So just so everybody is aware of that. You can use like the zombie mouse or the zombie chicken or whatever, the zombie pig, but you cannot use a zombie human target. Reactive targets, targets that make use of or are composed of live ammunition, explosive, flammable flammable chemical substances or pressurized containers are never to be used in any 4-H activity. And Cloverbud age 4-H youth are not allowed to participate in any live fire activity involving firearms, air rifles, air pistols, or archery equipment. There should be no doubt in your minds about these 10 minimum standards. There should be no wavering from these 10 minimum standards, because if you deliberately disregard one of these 10 commandments, you will, and if somebody gets hurt, or worse yet, somebody dies, then your fate is in the hands of the judge and jury. And if you disregard the recommendation of the national management bodies, such as the 4-H Shooting Sports Committee, which is a chartered entity of the National 4-H headquarters, or 4-H National Headquarters, and somebody gets hurt, there's a good chance that the university is not going to represent you or provide you with any kind of risk protection. My experience is that will not happen. If you are not following these 10 minimum standards, and you are not following what's in your job responsibilities as a shooting sports volunteer, then the university will not provide you with any kind of the liability insurance. On the other hand, if you act within the scope of your training, and if you follow the 4-H national minimum standards, and you do your best to avoid negligence, you're going to be okay. So state level best practices. So now that we understand those minimum standards of the 4-H shooting sports program, let's look at what we call best practices. So the difference between the minimum standards and the best practices is that the minimum standards are not negotiable. The best practices, on the other hand, allow for state-by-state differences based on state statute, differences in policies and rules at the different land-grant university systems, and the differences in the state 4-H policies. So we're going to talk about, right now we're going to talk about the national committee, what their recommendations are. I will tell you that this is going to be one of the things that our state advisory committee is going to start looking at one is, what are going to be our state level best practices based on, what the university is telling us we need to do now, which I said before is a little bit different than it's been in the past. So recognizing the diversity of the 4-H shooting sports program within each state, here are the recommendations. So eye protection. Adequate eye protection is required for all participants in muzzleloader, pistol, rifle, and shotgun disciplines. This includes the hunting and the Western Heritage live fire events. Such protection is strongly advised in archery as well. And so that includes coaches and spectators on or near the firing lines. They're subject to the same requirements. Ear protection. Adequate ear protection is also required for all participants in muzzleloader, pistol, rifle, and shotgun disciplines. This also includes the hunting and the Western Heritage live fire events. And again, those coaches and spectators that are on or near the firing line are subject to the same requirements. Footwear. In short, open-toe shoes of any kind are not recommended for the shooting line. So the equipment management, or the inventory control. Inventory list should be maintained by one individual. There needs to be a sign-in and sign-out and sign-in process that will help keep track of the equipment. Only improved instructors should be checking out equipment. Extension staff overseeing the program need to have access to all equipment and all records. That includes, the club. If your club, they should be able to have access to those, and then also they should have all of those records. Equipment inventory should be audited annually. So for us, The equipment inventory is part of our risk management plan. I don't believe, it would be nice if we could do it annually, but knowing this state, I don't think that that's going to be possible. But I would expect that that every county will be going through an inventory audit probably once every 3 to 4 years. And if there isn't one of the reasons why we're getting to the point where we're getting a lot stricter on the inventory control and the equipment management is because if we did not have these processes in place, then the equipment gets lost, it's unaccounted for, and it can deteriorate because it's not getting repaired when it's damaged. So management and storage, the equipment management related to storage. So all firearms should be in a lockable cabinet or a safe with an open bolt or a clear bore indicator in place. They should be all locked cabinets, and safes should be in a secure locked storage area if possible. And keys and combinations should only be available to certified instructors and extension staff. And you're going to be seeing more about that from our university as well. So for ammunition, the simple practice of storing ammunition and securing that ammunition in a separate place from the firearm in which it should be used creates a level of protection against accidental discharge. So you really should not store them in the same location. All ammunition and again, multiple lock options offer that another layer of protection. So transportation. So all applicable local, state, and federal laws should be followed when transporting firearms. Only licensed drivers over the age of 18 should transport 4-H shooting sports equipment, and they should be transported in locked cases and not be visible from the outside of the vehicle. I have to just share a story with you. One time this is when I was in Idaho, and I had to go pick up a bunch of equipment. We had 22 rifles and air rifles that were they were in one county, and I was about 2 hours away. And we were having a shooting sports training that weekend. And so I made arrangements to drive down, pick up that equipment. And so on top of that, I brought down with me because I was in northern Idaho and this training was in southern Idaho. And I brought down with me all of our bows, all of our muzzle loader, like all of the other equipment. And so I had a minivan. And so I drove over, got the rifles and got the air rifles and got the 22s, and I was driving back and blew a tire on the freeway. And I was about an hour from Boise, about an hour away. And I thought, oh my gosh, where is my spare tire? Because my entire car was fully loaded. I mean, you couldn't see into it because it was, I had dark windows, but the entire back of my van, I did not have the seats in the back of my van. I only had like one seat in there for my son to ride in, and everything else was out. And this thing was fully loaded with all the shooting sports equipment. Thank goodness my spare tire was underneath the car, and I did not have to unload all of that equipment because I thought, oh, that's going to look very funny on the side of the freeway trying to, when I have all these guns unloaded on the side. So, there's just I was doing it correctly. They were not visible from the outside of the vehicle unless I lifted up the back end, but nothing you can do about that. But, and then, I'm thinking, what if a cop comes up here and looks at this and says, my gosh, what are you doing? It looked a little crazy. So youth and adult participations. So instructors have the right to refuse someone for participating in the program for safety reasons. If you have somebody that just keeps screwing around, will not listen, will not do anything that you're asking them to do, you can ask them not to participate. it is important that we try and we provide accommodations for those with disabilities. If you have somebody with a disability, either physical or that you're not sure how you can accommodate that, call the county, who will then get a hold of the state office, and we will work with you on figuring that out. It is, we do have civil rights responsibilities that we must work with the audiences. So if it's something that we just absolutely can't accommodate, but for the most part, we can usually figure out a way. 4-H is open to anyone who is the appropriate age, as determined by our state. Within Nevada, it's 9 to 18. And Cloverbud youth ages 5 to 8 are not allowed to participate. So let's talk about the risk management plan. So there should be a written and current risk management plan in place for any of our state, county, or club level shooting sports activities or events. So within that, it needs to include goals. You can see these 5 things. A good risk management plan is going to address specific situations that might be encountered during the program. We need to think ahead about issues that might happen. So with goals of your program, simply put, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? And where do you intend to go with the program? Write it down. Personnel policies. So information about volunteer application and training procedures, state supervision ratios, state transportation of minor policies, etc. A job description. This is something that we're working on, is trying to get all of our 4-H volunteers in general to have a job description, but especially shooting sports volunteers. So the records, you need to keep an activity log of every meeting or practice session that's conducted that includes things like the date of the activity, the name of the instructors present, the names of the 4-H members and the family members that are present, a description of the activity that they conducted, a narrative of any unusual occurrences, a log of any injuries, and a signature line for the person filling out the form. And then supervision, written supervision plan, then it contains supervision requirements or policies that need to be followed. Some more items that you should have on there. It should include emergency response procedures. You should always know the procedure before you have to need it. So things like I said before, things like who's going to call 911, who has the first aid kit, those types of things. You should have information about the equipment care, use, and storage. That should be in there. Facilities information. What are unique things about the facility that need to be written down? Or what are some potential hazards or other oddities that you might want to put? And then anything else that you think needs to be added into there. Okay, so there are sample risk management plans on the National 4-H Shooting Sports website. We also have those on this Nevada 4-H website. So either place you can go, but the one that is required in Nevada is the one from the Nevada 4-H website. So the risk management model. This section of the training really deals with risk management. So the original, risk management information that's been used in the 4-H shooting sports instructor training has been revised to be a little bit more streamlined for the look and the content. And so, but this is an important subject that cannot be left out. So what is risk? If you look at it in the simplest terms, it means a chance of loss. So what are risks within the 4-H shooting sports program? Can you name any risks for the youth or adults that are involved in the program? What about the injury to the 4-H member? Or even worse, a fatal injury to a 4-H member? What about the risk to a 4-H volunteer being on the wrong end of a civil lawsuit because of a claim of negligence that resulted in the injury of another person? So how are we going to protect ourselves or the others involved in the program and the program itself? Again, keeping it simple, risk management is a system to protect our assets by minimizing the potential for negative outcomes. So how would you describe the term assets, other than being the 6 points on a game of Scrabble? So assets are anything of value that is held by an organization or an individual. There are two types of assets. There are tangible assets that are financial in nature and that can be broken down into current or fixed assets. So things like cash and stock and facilities and land, etc. And the second type of assets are intangible. Those are things like our your reputation or the program's reputation, the trust, the character, integrity, and especially the people who make the 4-H program function. So there are 4 major steps in risk management efforts. Those include identification of the risks involved, the analysis of the risk, the evaluation of the risk, and the treatment of the risk, or how we choose to deal with the risks of the program. The first step, identification of the risks involved in the 4-H shooting sports program. You know, in life, there are very few, if any, activities that don't carry some kind of risk with it. I mean, you take a risk every morning when you get out of bed, and you take a risk every day when you drink a cup of coffee, and, you know, there's all these kinds of things. The Center for Disease Control reports that 250,000 people in the United States each year are injured in their own bathroom. So the chance of no risk is a rare thing. So now let's consider the shooting sports program, where we have firearms and sharp, pointy arrows in the hands of kids. Are there any risks involved there? And the answer is yes. So the next step, now we're going to analyze that risk. Are the 4-H shooting sport Are the shooting sports a high risk or low risk activity? The answer to that question is, it depends. If done with adequate training, supervision, vetted curriculum, and qualified staff to provide adequate oversight to the program, yes, it can be a very low risk endeavor. As explained earlier in the historically low injury rate of the 4-H shooting sports program. To get the answer to this question, you have to go on to the next step of evaluate the potential risk. So in the evaluation phase of the risk assessment model, we must determine the severity or the frequency of the risk. For example, if one 4-H member in 10,000 gets a paper cut each year from completing their 4-H record books, this would be an example of a risk of low severity and low frequency. Probably a risk that we're willing to live with, right? If 1 in 10 4-H members, or even 1 in 100 4-H members, or even 1 in 1,000 4-H members in the shooting sports program are injured, requiring hospitalization each year, it could be assumed that the program would carry risk that was too severe or too frequent for a land-grant university to have anything to do with. In reality, most of the risks involved in the 4-H shooting sports program are very low frequency, but potentially high severity. So how do we handle those risks? The treatment of those risks has been that can be identified, have been thought of. How do we choose to address or handle the risk of our program? The most absolute certain way to avoid risk in this program is to not have the program. And you know what? If we don't do a good job at risk management, that's exactly what the university administrator could recommend be the preferred method for managing the potential risk of the 4-H shooting sports program. And that is happening in some places around the country. And so that's exactly what we want to avoid. All it takes is one incident in a state for that state to suddenly find themselves with no 4-H shooting sports program where there once was one. And there are some counties that choose not to have one because of that. All of our actions should be guided by this chilling thought, and it can happen in the blink of an eye. So if we agree that completely avoiding the risk that might be associated with the program is not a desirable outcome, let's look at the other options. If we can choose to retain the risk, which means we're willing to put up with some level of risk because it's natural to have some kind of inherent risk in just about everything we do in 4-H. As I mentioned before, who thought carving pumpkins would cause lawsuits and injuries, that required multiple surgeries? It wasn't just one, it was multiple, and lawsuits. So there's risk involved in working with kids. There's risks involved in managing in managing a volunteer-led youth development program. And there are certainly risks involved when you consider that the program uses firearms and sharp pointed arrows in the hands of kids. So now that we agree that we need to retain the risk in providing this program, I'll ask you, are there ways that we can reduce that risk that we've decided to retain? Well, sure there are. We can reduce the risk by following our state's best management practices and the state 4-H policies. We can reduce the risk by requiring a minimum of 12 hours of instruction before 4-H volunteers can become a certified 4-H shooting sports instructor. We can reduce the risk by way of simple educational approaches such as MAT, muzzle, action, trigger, that are taught in the rifle discipline, for example. The 4-H shooting sports program utilizes many methods to reduce the risk of this valuable 4-H youth development program. So once we decide to retain and reduce said risk, we can also share the risk. An example is when we purchase supplemental health insurance and supplemental accident insurance for 4-H members. In the case of injury, the cost of the medical treatment can be shared with the insurance company. Plus, the simple act also conveys that the youth's best interest is our main concern. So there you have it. This is the risk management model that guides the 4-H shooting sports program. So what does this mean to you as an instructor? First, you have the duty to provide a safe environment for the program. Second, you should conduct activities in a reasonable and prudent manner in accordance with recognized protocol and procedure. If you don't remember anything from this training, I want you to remember those two words: reasonable and prudent. Those are the two words that a jury will use to assess your actions. And should anyone get hurt on your watch as a 4-H shooting sports instructor. So you had better make sure that, and you had better think about each and every action as whether they would be considered reasonable and prudent by a jury of your peers. This concept is the heart of our risk management model. So let's talk a little bit about the concept of negligence. Failure to perform a legally owed duty is a reasonable and prudent person would perform with the failure resulting in a consequence, someone being hurt, that should have been foreseen. This is the definition of negligence. But the "I didn't know" defense won't protect you from the legal ramifications of negligence. For negligence to be proven, there's 4 things that need to happen. A duty must be owed. Let's say your duty is to provide a safe environment. An example, always having a certified 4-H instructor on the range when the range is hot. The duty must be breached. For example, if you're the only certified instructor on the range and you don't close down and secure the range while you take a bathroom break. There are actual damages. Someone is hurt by an accident accidental discharge at close range because a beginning shooter was on the line in your absence. And 4, there might be a proximal cause established. If you would have been on the line, the accident would most likelihood have not happened. So let's think about negligence in another way. Let's think about it as a negligence meter. If your actions would be judged by a jury of your peers as being reasonable to very reasonable, the chances of your actions being in the negligible area of the gauge would be rare. However, if you start flirting around the barely reasonable or unreasonable part of this picture, you might find yourself in the negligent part of the picture. It's not a good place to be. Your number one duty is, okay, so with the negligence spectrum well painted in your brain, let's talk about the duties that are owed by you to the 4-H as a 4-H shooting sports instructor. Your first and foremost duty is to use and follow the established 4-H shooting sports curriculum, lesson plans, and procedures. If you take it upon yourself to vary from the 4-H curriculum and somebody gets hurt, a jury might see that as not being reasonable or prudent. That said, can we add activities and procedures from other shooting sports organizations? Sure. For example, we use the shooting event rules and procedures from the other national governing bodies at the 4-H Shooting Sports National Championships, such as the Civil Marksmanship Program, which would be deemed reasonable and prudent by a jury of your peers. But as for our core safety procedures and positive youth development purposes, you need to be using and following the 4-H shooting sports curriculum as a foundation for your instruction. Duties owed by the 4-H shooting sports instructor also include: you must properly plan for the activity. You must properly provide proper instruction. You must explain the inherent risks to the members. And we do have waivers. Every year, the young people sign waivers when they enroll in 4-H. But if you would like a separate 4-H, or if you would like a separate assumption of risk waiver for the 4-H shooting sports program, then please talk to your county educator about that. And you can have every young person sign that. You must always monitor for injury. And then if you have a duty to everybody that's involved to ensure that the equipment that you're using is safe, that you don't have a gun that misfires every 5th shot or randomly. You need to provide for proper emergency response when it's needed. You need to know where a phone is, or you need to know that you have cell phone service, etc. You must maintain adequate records, and you must provide close supervision. You need to be watching the range and not talking to other people. And you must always inspect. Inspect your equipment, inspect your facilities, inspect the weather, and inspect the people in your charge all the time. Wow, that's a lot to remember. You need to write it all down. And guess what? That's your risk management plan. So let's think about this. So you've carefully thought out all the angles. You've done it 1,000 times. This comes naturally to you. You know what you've been doing. You've been trained to do it your whole life. Nothing can possibly go wrong, right? Think again. To conclude this discussion on risk management, I'm going to share with you a true story that happened that hopefully is going to drive home the importance of this subject. This is something that happened in another state. I was actually not directly involved in this, but as soon as it happened, we all heard about it and scared us all to death. So just listen to this. So it's going to be a bad day when This happens at your county 4-H shoot. This is a true story that happened on June 5th of 2015 in a state and a county which is going to remain unnamed, and it involved a boy named Cody. Not my Cody, another Cody. It was the results of a county 4-H shoot. It's called 53 lead pellets from a 12-gauge shotgun. 53 lead pellets from a 12-gauge shotgun shell at close range. Not good. How did it happen? So it was your average run-of-the-mill county 4-H qualifying match prior to the state level shoot. After the qualifying match, the 4-H members had a fun shoot with various types of reactive targets. Lots of fun stuff. After the fun shoot was over and all the firearms had been removed from the range and stored, the 4-H members and their little brothers and sisters were downrange cleaning up from the fun shoot. Now what you need to know at this fun shoot was there were 3 reactive targets that were operated by way of shooting a .22 caliber round at the front at the front of a steel target. I want to make sure I get the story right, so I am kind of reading this one. So you shoot a .22 round at the front of a steel target that contained a live 12-gauge shotgun shell. When struck with the .22 round, it would discharge the 12-gauge shotgun shell. The shell could be a regular 12-gauge, or it could be a modified to remove the shot and replace the black powder, which could create a big bang. On this day, the shells were regular shotgun shells with shot in them. And it seemed as though nobody had been monitoring the status of these 3 reactive targets. Only 2 of the 3 had been discharged during the course of the fun shoot. This resulted in a live, locked and loaded and cocked firearm, primitive as it may be, but still a live firearm being downrange among the group of kids who were picking up the range. Okay, so you can see where this is headed. So young and helpful Cody, who was 7 at the time, was downrange helping to clean up. Cody walked up to the still reactive target and pulls it out of the ground. And he then drops it, and the 12-gauge shell discharges at the range of about 2 feet from his upper torso. The result was 53 lead pellets in this young man's shoulder, neck, and face. This was not a good day in 4-H world in this state or the country. And June 5th, 2015 was a tough day for Cody. How bad was it? Cody could have been fatally injured, permanently disfigured, or suffered long-term injuries. The 4-H program in the county automatically was shut down by the LGU by the land-grant university pending an investigation of the incident. And the entire 4-H shooting sports program was in danger of being shut down. So we all need to learn from this experience and ask ourselves, how do we keep something like this from ever happening again? Step 1, think about every bad thing, even unimaginable, wild and weird things that could possibly happen in the way that you're conducting that activity or event. Step 2, you then engineer those bad things out of the activity or the event beforehand. So what are the bad things that allowed this to happen? Because of the potential bad things that happened with this type of reactive target, there is now a national safety standard for 4-H shooting sports regarding reactive targets that you've learned about already. So the number 1 item to prevent this activity would have been never to use a device such as a risk management downside in any 4-H shooting sports activity. There are many ways someone could have gotten hurt with this type of target, even during the shoot, and it should never have been part of the 4-H program. Another factor is that Cody was 7 years old at the time of the event, cloverbud age. At that time, most states had strict policies regarding the involvement of cloverbuds in any live fire activity. But Cody wasn't injured during a live fire activity. He was just helping clean up the range. So the other lesson might be that we have to really think through any involvement by cloverbuds in a potentially hazardous situation, even if it doesn't involve live fire. And by the way, there is now a national 4-H shooting sports safety standard regarding cloverbud involvement in 4-H shooting sports, which you've already learned about. So some good things came from the risk management front that day. First of all, Cody's mom was a range safety officer that day. She's a good mom and a great 4-H shooting sports instructor. But if the youngster injured on that day would have been Johnny's friend from down the street, there could have been a real possibility that a civil or even criminal lawsuit could have been filed. There's even a bigger possibility that this state could have lost their 4-H shooting sports program for good. The university attorney could have easily decided to avoid the risk of this program by shutting it down. They got really lucky on that one. Another good thing that happened on the risk management front was that now there are national standards regarding reactive targets and cloverbud involvement. And most of all, they were really lucky because this is a picture of Cody relaxing at home 4 days after the incident. You can see that he's doing fine. Thank goodness. So the bottom line of this story is really that risk management is real. There are consequences to it. That makes it a very important topic for each of you to be in command of. It's important, and we can't depend on luck to save us. So thanks for listening to this session. I know that it took longer than we thought, but I hope you took really good notes, because what are 2 things that you want to remember? Reasonable and prudent. Okay. And have a great night and a great training. Thank you.